welcome to The Audible presented by Trader Joe's. I'm Stuart Mandel, joined by Bruce Feldman. Ralph Russo has advanced to the Sweet 16, so he is not with us today, but we have a great guest, our colleague at The Athletic, Cameron Teague Robinson, the esteemed Ohio State beat writer. We're going to get into some Buckeyes spring practice observations and then do the mailbag. Cam, welcome to the show.
I appreciate you guys having me.
All right, Cam, thanks for joining us. You're covering a program that is always a powerhouse. And now they have to replace probably 4 first-round picks off of a dominant defense last year. Big first year for Matt Patricia as the defense coordinator. How is it shaping up in terms of like, who do you expect to step up and be those guys? And how good do you think this defense will be relative to what we just saw from them?
Yeah. I think it'd be hard to match last year's team. It's kind of crazy because you look at 2 years ago and they won a championship, you thought, oh man, that defense was really good. How are they going to replace those guys? And didn't they just replace them with maybe an even better defense? I don't think we'll see that this year. You can't lose 2 first-round linebackers and then just magically pop up 2 first-round linebackers again. So that'll be tough. That's one of the spots where you look at like Riley Pettijohn was kind of one of their priority linebacker recruits a couple years ago. He's going to be a guy who steps in. He's been hurt through the spring, so he hasn't got a lot of time. They brought in Wisconsin transfer Christian Allegro, who they hope helps there. Peyton Pierce will be there. But I think some of the guys you really look at, like Kenyatta Jackson is back on the edge. Like he has to have a big year for them if they're going to be good. Jermaine Matthews at corner. They really love Devin Sanchez, 5-star freshman last year. Hope he can step in. And then to me, I look at probably their strongest position, which is kind of crazy to think after you lose Caleb Downs. It's probably safety. They really like Jalen McClain. He was kind of like their safety blanket last year. And then the 2 guys they brought up to the portal, Terry Moore and Earl Little. I think Terry Moore back in 2024 is probably considered one of the best safeties in the country before he tore his ACL. And then they're hoping they can keep him healthy. And then Earl Little both those guys can provide some flexibility, whether they're playing a nickel or up top. So there's a lot to fill, especially I think the hardest spot for them right now to fill will be Caden McDonald. I don't think you fill a guy or replace a guy like that just out of the blue. But they got John Walker from UCF, who they hope can help there. And then the Alabama duo of Quay Rousseau and James Smith. So like, there's a lot of transfers. I think Ryan made the point the other day. There's 51 new players. I mean, it's kind of crazy. You walk into practice and everyone has new numbers. Everybody's a new face. Even Julian Sand looks different. So it's just it's a very different roster. But it'll be hard for that defense to live up to what it was last year. Still expect to be good, but how good, I think, especially with the schedule they play, will be relative.
Well, obviously, the star power is on offense. You mentioned Julian Sand, Jeremiah Smith, obviously, Bo Jackson coming off a great freshman year. And so I guess my question is not so much about the personnel, but the one knock on that offense last year was that maybe Ryan Day went a little too far in the direction of slowing it down, fewer snaps, preserving guys for the playoff. And it kind of came back to bite them in the Big Ten title game and especially in the Miami game, the playoff game against Miami when they needed to come back. So has he talked about that at all so far in the spring?
He has not. No, we only talked to him once since the game. And so that press conference was loaded with a lot of like spring and coaching stuff and things of that nature. But he hasn't talked much about that. I assume that will get brought up a lot throughout the offseason though. But I do agree. I think that's one of the things where you have to be able to do both. Like I think there has to be a middle ground. Like you want to keep your guys fresh, but you have to be able to go fast when you need to go fast. And Ohio State just seemed like they never could go fast last year, except for right before halftime against Miami. And then they nearly scored, and then they just never went back to it. So that will be the thing that I think you look at the most, along with maybe the offensive line. Like you said, the offense roster-wise is, loaded. Bo's, like you said, Bo Jackson will be a big part of that in the running back room, which is kind of a question mark. But outside of the O-line, you really look at just what will this offense look at from like a pace of play standpoint. And how often, especially, and again, I keep going back to this, but the schedule is like, how do you experiment with your pace of play while also knowing that you play Texas, Oregon, Indiana, Nebraska, USC, and Iowa, and you really don't have, it's not like last year's schedule where you can just kind of, let's just try some stuff against Minnesota. You really don't have a lot of options for that this year.
Well, it helps that you do have an experienced quarterback now in Julian Sand, but now you have a new offensive coordinator in there, in Arthur Smith, who comes back to college from the NFL after a long time in the NFL. The guys I'm interested in, because I feel like Ohio State, has been able to crank out like five-star caliber recruits. We know they still have the best receiver there, right? Obviously, Jeremiah Smith's back for his third and most likely final season. The two guys I want to ask you about, just because we're always looking for like the next thing. So Chris Henry Jr., obviously, son of the late great former West Virginia and Bengals star. I know because he's played in Southern California at Mater Dei. He made some remarkable catches like his father, great size and great length and ball skills. The other one that I've heard a lot of buzz about, and again, he's like perfect for Instagram, which is why my son has brought up his name a bunch, is Legend Bay, who's like this wild card option. He's from Texas. He was a big recruit, but wasn't like everybody's 5-star, but super fast. I think he was like a 10-2 something. Maybe it was wind dated, but still 10-2 anything is 100 meters is crazy. How does he fit in? How do you see Chris Henry being? Like, is he going to be, is he going to step in from Carnell Tate? I know there's other guys who are still really good there. In terms of the skill guys and how that works with Arthur Smith, what he's trying to do there offensively.
Yeah. Well, starting with Chris. Like, I think the first thing you notice with Chris is just how tall he is. He looks like he could be like a small forward for like Ohio State's basketball team right now. Like, that's just kind of what he looks like. And the thing about this receiver room is I think it's not as talented, right? Because you can't replace Carnell Tate and just be like, oh, it's more talented than it was a year ago. But it's definitely deeper. Like, you have more playable receivers right now in terms of like Jeremiah. Chris Henry is a guy who I think most people pencil in as a starter next year. Brandon Ennis. And then you got the transfers, Devin McKinnon and Kyle Parker, who will probably fight playing time. And another freshman, Guilford, who will probably fight playing time. So like, they have a lot of receivers. So I think right now Hankton is just trying to find out who his guys are. But I fully expect by the time they kick off in the fall that Chris Henry will be the guy opposite Jeremiah Smith on the outside. And then they'll figure out how to place piece in everybody else. I don't think this is going to be a receiver room like it was with Brian Hartline, where they play the 3 top guys. They might go to a 4th guy every once in a while, and that's it. I do think they'll sprinkle in and rotate more than they ever have. I don't expect Jeremiah Smith to ever leave the field, but I think the rest of them will probably sprinkle in more. As for Legend Bay, I think he's been a hot topic because Ohio State fans have fallen in love with him already because he comes to Ohio State as like a superb athlete, like you said, Bruce. Ohio State's trying to figure out where they want to put him. He's working out with the running backs for part of the spring. He's working out with receivers for part of practice. Like, he's just kind of splitting positions right now. So I don't know what type of expectations you put on a kid like that so early because he's so young. He's also coming to a program that if he goes out there and messes up one play, it's going to be very hard for him to get back on the field at receiver or even running back. Like, you're taking Bo Jackson off the field for a guy in Legend Bay if he's going to make a mistake. So he has to learn both positions. And Ohio State wants to use him like they used Xavier Johnson a few years ago, back when I think that was the 2023 or 2022 when they played Georgia in the Peach Bowl in the semis, and they had no running backs and they had to play Xavier Johnson at receiver and running back. They probably used him similar to how they used Curtis Samuel. So he has to learn and catch up very fast. But he's physically, man, he's there. He's athletic. He's bigger than you would think for a kid his age. It's just a matter of how fast he catch up with the playbook and what he needs to do. But it is a lot of weapons for Arthur Smith. To me, I look at Arthur Smith as similar to like the way he can impact Ohio State, similar to Chip Kelly, because, Arthur's so good in the run game and Ryan's really good in the pass game. So I think they can mesh really well. And it could help Bo and the rest of those running backs have a really good year.
Well, speaking of Arthur Smith, I think one of the most interesting things about Ohio State right now as a program is that Ryan Day is clearly saying with his hires over the last couple of years, like, we need NFL guys, right? He wasn't, he went to Matt Patricia, which a lot of people are surprised by. He gets an former NFL head coach. And by the way, and I know they're not the only program doing this, but part of the story when he was hired is like, we don't expect these guys to recruit much. They are here to game plan and scheme. So why has Ryan Day gone so all in on NFL?
Yeah, I think the thing he realized a couple years ago, the year he won the championship game, was that like the best thing for him is to not be calling plays. which is a crazy transition for him because he loved calling plays. That's one of his favorite things to do as a coach. And then when they won the title, he was like, all right, this is probably what's best for us. And you give it to a guy like Brian Hartline, and eventually he was going to have to call plays. That was like the next step. So he was either going to call plays or he was going to go somewhere else. So you give him that chance. But I think what they learned over the years is that he wanted someone who was experienced in running everything on that side of the ball. So he doesn't have to go in there and dip in and do anything. He can be CEO. He can kind of handle NIL, handle fundraising, dip into rooms here and there. But he wanted a guy who could be the head coach of his offense. So who's best to be a head coach of an offense rather than a former NFL head coach? So I think that's kind of where it is. I think he wants people who are experienced in running not only a room, but multiple coaches and have experience running everything on one side of the ball that he can completely trust it. And then you're at Ohio State where you have the funds to really kind of get those guys from the NFL. Just be honest with that, though. Like if this school at Northwestern can't do that, right? They're not paying $3.7 million for a defense coordinator like Ohio State is paying Matt Patricia. So they have the financial means to do that. But also it just works out because it's guys who Ryan can trust and just leave alone and move into different roles within the program.
Cam, the last question I got for you is more of a big picture Ryan Day, Ohio State question. Obviously they won the national title, in 2024. Last season, it was kind of a weird year. You get out with the win over Texas and then kind of cruising along. And then you lose in the Big Ten title game, then get upset by Miami in the playoff. It felt like a little bit of an underwhelming season, I guess, in nature. Just it's hard to replicate what they had the year before, but they did beat Michigan. Obviously, it wasn't a great Michigan team, but I don't know if it was slaying that dragon for Ryan Day at that point because he'd beaten Michigan before, but it had been a while now for that program. Where do you think the fan base, you live there, where do you think the fan base is on Ryan Day right now? Is the Michigan thing always going to hover around him, or are people good with Ryan Day at this point around around Columbus and around the state of Ohio?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think Ohio State fans are very wishy-washy. I think right now they're just so mad about basketball that they are okay for right now. But I think there's a group of the fan base that feels like last year was wasted because of how talented that defense was, where you're looking at that defense and you're like, man, are we ever going to have a defense as talented from front to back ever again? Like, how do you replicate that? So I think there's a group of the fan base that is like, man, we shouldn't have lost Indiana. We shouldn't have lost to Miami. We should have won the championship. But I think there's also a group that's like, hey, let's be realistic. If you're not going to win the championship every year, what are we going to do and how do we get back to that this year? I think this is a big season for Ryan Day. Not that like as it was before 2024, where it's like a hot seat type of thing, but a difficult schedule. Last year with Jeremiah Smith, last year, presumably with Julian saying, how do you maximize their talents and make a run in the playoffs? So I don't think people are truly upset. I think if they were, they're probably passive by now, and it's kind of more just a hope of going into the spring. But I think when you originally you had the Miami loss, then you had all the transfers leaving. People were very worried of all this going on. But I think people have since either gotten back on board or like are just kind of in the we'll hope for a good year this year type of thing. But I do think there's a lot of people who are like, man, you really look back on last year and that, man, it was a legendary type of defense.
Yeah, my last thing's not really a question, but just a thought off of that, which is I think people need to start resetting their expectations a little bit in the 12-team playoff. Because I would contend that through 12 games, Ohio State had overachieved last season, given everybody they'd lost from the national championship year to go 12-0, right? Obviously, take care of Michigan at the end. But then, and even the Big Ten championship game was surprising at the time, but then you see what Indiana went on to do, and it's like, oh yeah, that was a really good team. But yeah, you probably should have made it further than the first playoff game. But that's going to happen. Like in a tournament, there's like randomness to it. So you might have the greatest team you've ever fielded, and they get upset in the first round. Then you may have a team that, like Miami last year, wasn't all that great, frankly, during the regular season, but got hot at the end. So it'll be interesting to see because Ohio State's a great example of like, not quite national championship or bust, but like we should come really close every year. It didn't happen last year, but I don't think that was like some indictment of Ryan Day. But
yeah,
You know,
I agree. I think if you
maybe
played
I'm
that,
being,
if you
yeah.
played that Cotton Bowl a few times, how many times did Jeremiah miss that block on the screen and it goes for a kick six? So you really know, like that game, that really changed the whole game. If he doesn't miss that block and Brandon has catches that ball, maybe he gets a first down. They continue, even if they get a field goal, it's a building game. So yeah, it's like you said, it's a tournament. Fluky things happen. But I mean, the schedule. I think the schedule this year is going to be a lot. So I think if that's really the focus right now. How do you get through the schedule and get into the playoffs? I think you're looking at maybe Ohio State hosts a playoff game this year. 12-0, which is not realistic. I don't think that's schedule. So 11-1, 10-2. Maybe you can host 9-3. Maybe you just get in. But it's going to be. I agree. I think expectations have to change, especially with conference realignment and how lopsided schedules are for teams now. Yeah. I think you have to be realistic with expectations now.
All right, Cam. Well, thanks for joining us. As always, our audience should follow all of Cam's work. He does an outstanding job on the Ohio State beat, and good luck to you guys to preaching reality and changing expectations. I think all you can hope for is that the AD and the leadership above has that perspective, because fans aren't going to be like, oh yeah, like it's a new day and era. We'll throttle back. Yeah, it doesn't work.
Yeah, if they go down to Austin and lose at the beginning of the year, it'll just be like, just flip a switch, hot seat type talk again. That's just how it is in Columbus. But that is what happens when you're Ohio State.
Thanks, Cam.
Thanks, Cam.
I appreciate it, guys. Yeah, definitely.
All right. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, it is mailbag time. All right, time for the mailbag. As always, you can send your questions to theaudiblepod@gmail.com. And one lucky emailer is going to win the $16 Trader Joe's gift card of the week. All right, Bruce, we start with our old friend Vinny. He didn't put his hometown, but I believe it's in Wisconsin. Players who could have used the portal. Who are some players from before the transfer portal era who would have benefited the most from having a portal? Two examples I can think of are App State legend Armonte Edwards, who, ironically enough, would have been a perfect fit with Rich Rod's Michigan, and Cardell Jones, who could have used another year of college instead of going pro after losing the job to JT Barrett. Excited to hear who you guys come up with. I just want to add real quick that it's not just the portal and the fact that they would have been eligible to play immediately.
Yeah, so this is a good question. There's a bunch of names that come to mind, but timing is good for me on this one. On Wednesday, I had a story come out that I'd worked on for like the last couple of months, and it is the oral history of Randy Moss's pro day at Marshall. It was 1998. It was a frigid day in Huntington, West Virginia. This was not like running it inside the Colts facility, and having trained 6 weeks or 2 months for it. This was Randy Moss at like 28 degrees, just basically getting out, stretching once to the left, once to the right, and then putting on an insane show for NFL scouts. But he was a known commodity as an athlete, right? He committed to Notre Dame out of high school. Lou Holtz had said he was the greatest high school player he'd ever seen. He wasn't able to play at Notre Dame. He wasn't able to go to Notre Dame. So his buddy Bobby Bowden took him at Florida State. He had to redshirt because of off-field issues. And then when he redshirted the first year, everybody at Florida State was amazed by what they would see with him at practice. And then Moss had a positive marijuana test and then couldn't stay at Florida State. So he went to Marshall, which was at the time the best option for him because it was a 1AA program, because he would have had to sit out another year if he had gone to West Virginia and stayed in state. So he goes to Marshall. It's their last year of what was at the time 1AA, but known as FCS. He dominates. They dominate. They go 15-0, win the national title. He has one more year left. They move up to the essentially FBS level. They were playing in the MAC. Won 10 games. He also dominated that level. I had asked some folks, including one of the guys who was at his pro day, John Garrett, Jason Garrett's older brother, who was a longtime NFL scout and coach, and he helped run that pro day, but now he's like the GM at Florida State. I was like, if Randy Moss came along now, how much money would he have commanded? I asked that to a couple of people who still work in college sports. And he was like, God, I have no idea just how much he would have gotten. Another person had told me, whatever Jeremiah Smith is getting from Ohio State, if it's Randy Moss based off of, we're talking about the greatest deep threat in the history of football. He was like, I think he would have commanded double that, which is insane to say that. But if we're hearing Cam Coleman's getting $2 or $3 million coming out of, Auburn, I mean, Randy Moss, given what he had done in that 1 year at Marshall, how he just toyed with people, I don't know. He would have made a fortune. And just think about how much different your offense is when you have the guy who takes the top of every defense off. He's a threat like we've never seen in football. He would be my answer.
The two things that come to mind is there could have been a lot of group of five players who were great group of five players who might have moved up. I don't, who knows? But like, how much money would somebody have thrown at Kellen Moore to come play at a Power 4 conference? Garrett Wolf, the great NIU running back. Just some of these names are guys who just wanted to spotlight themselves at the highest level. Jordan Lynch, Bruce. Could you have seen Jordan Lynch as a Power 4 quarterback? Donnell Pumphrey. I used a little AI here to pull up a list of the best group of five players from the last 25 years. The other category would be quarterbacks who turned out to be great, but had to wait for a while and might have left earlier. If Joe Burrow didn't have to wait till he was a grad transfer, does he go become the quarterback at LSU or somewhere like a year or two earlier instead of waiting his turn at Ohio State? And here's one for you. Does Tom Brady see that he's going to get stuck in a platoon with Drew Henson and go somewhere else from Michigan and just completely rewrites history of the Tom Brady legacy?
I don't know if Tom Brady becomes Tom Brady, though, if he doesn't stay at Michigan and have that kind of incubation of, what it did. I remember, Greg Harden, the late Greg Harden, who was so influential around Michigan athletics, was one of the people he really leaned on in his development and everything. So I think it's a fun question to get into, but there are so many things about like why it needed to be this way. Like going back to Moss for a second, one of the people I had talked to had said, Bobby Bowden had told people at Marshall at a much later date, was like, if Randy had just lied and said, no, that I didn't do that, he was like, he probably would have still played for Florida State. But because he was honest about, I did smoke weed, that he had to go. And I think, again, if he went to Florida State, is his career any different? I don't know. But I'm curious to see, like, sometimes the path people end up on is the path and they needed to go on, especially people who ended up at greatness anyway.
I think it can go either way, right? Some of these guys, maybe if they don't stay at the school they ended up at, things turn out worse, and maybe for some things turn out better.
Stu, we're going to stay on a little bit of FCS talk. This leads into Mike in New Hampshire's question about the FCS versus FBS playoff. Guys, FCS has a 24-team playoff, so why will it be so bad for FBS to go to 24 teams? I grew up in Cincinnati, so did Stu, and went to multiple Florida Bowls and Rose Bowls as an Ohio State fan, student, and graduate. I love the idea of traveling to bowls that teams care about, and I do miss the high-stakes nature of early season big games that has been lost a little bit due to the 4 and 12 team playoff. But those days are gone, and I'm still here watching every Saturday and many other days. So why is 24 so bad? Is it just the death of bowls? Okay, Stu, what do you think about that?
It's not the death of bowls. I mean, I loved going to bowls and Rose Bowls too, but I think we can all acknowledge that ship has sailed, and that's not That's not the main motivating factor here. I get why you would make the comparison, the FCS-FBS comparison, just because of the size of the field. But for me, it's about the regular season. And the fact of the matter is, there are not 10 million people watching a regular season FCS game or 100,000 people going to a stadium to watch an FCS game. There's not as much, I would guess. What I would say is like the stakes are lower if those games become a little devalued. I think even though the 12-team playoff has reduced stakes a little bit for like an Ohio State-Texas game, it's still a pretty high bar to make the playoff. We have 2 years in, it's 10-2 or better, and even some 10-2 haven't made it. So there's not a lot of room for error. But if we start talking about 8-4 teams and maybe even 7-5 teams going to the playoff, it just fundamentally changes what college football is all about, right? Where the games matter, the games are big. You start to feel, I think Tony Petitti feels like college football does it wrong and the NFL does it right, and this should be more like the NFL. And to which I would say, if you turn college football into the NFL, you're losing the appeal of college football to begin with, right? Because otherwise it's just the NFL with less talented players. And I think, and you can weigh in on this yourself, but like, to me, the most college football thing is how great the regular season is and how big the Saturdays are and the stakes. And I just think when the field gets that big, that just goes down the drain.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, as you were saying that, I was like, 8-4 teams making the playoff. But then you said 7-5, and I kind of winced. I mean, do you really think a 7-5 team realistically would make the playoff of 24 teams?
Just go back and look at past. I mean, you're basically talking about the whole top 25 at this point. Maybe there's a group of 5 team that sneaks in that isn't ranked because they need one. It's not far off. I mean, it's really not. I don't think in the last 2 years there would have been one, but there are teams that finish 7-5 and are right on the fringe of the top 25. Probably not very often. Probably just like we haven't seen 9-3 make the 12 team yet. But you're going to have 8-4 teams that didn't beat anybody. That
right.
Iowa would have been in the field last year, and I actually think maybe they're not the best example because I thought they were pretty good. They took Oregon and Indiana to the wire.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like, they didn't have any significant wins. So it would just literally be like, well, we need somebody. And they play in the Big Ten and they're 8-4, so they're going. That's not what college football is about.
Yeah. I mean, I'm with you. Like, to me, it's the best regular season in any sport. And it's the thing to me that college football has over, and I'm talking about like FBS, major college football, right? I like FCS for how it is, but it's kind of a different animal too, much like the NFL and college are different. So I agree with you. But maybe that's where we're headed. I hope not. As we just the nature of a 7-5 team to me is a disqualifier. It's a disqualifier to that thought process. Like, if we're going to go to 24 teams, it ain't worth it. Because one thing when you said this, if Tony Petitti or whoever wants it to be more like the NFL, look, I love the NFL, but the NFL is a different business model where the teams are, talent-wise are way more comparable than they are with what you could get at the bottom of the top 25 or a 7-5 team.
So just as an example, Bruce, here would have been some of the first round games in last year's field. Number 15, Utah, 10-2, against number 18, Michigan, 9-3. We would have had Vanderbilt against Virginia. We would have had Miami against that Iowa team I just talked about. And my favorite, the number 9 versus 24 game, Alabama versus James Madison. It's just not. I mean, I guess you'd say, okay, it's football. Like, it's more football. Let's watch it. But like, this is not excellence. This is mediocrity.
Iowa was 9-3, right?
8-4.
8-4. That's the 8-4 with what was their best win?
Here are Iowa's wins. I'm just going to rattle
Nebraska,
them off.
a 7-6 Nebraska
Rutgers, team. Wisconsin, Penn State, Minnesota maybe would be the best one. 41-3. Michigan State, Nebraska, and that would get them in the playoff. Because there will be 8-4 teams. Like, there's not enough 9-3 or better to field a 2014 playoff, and those 8-4 teams would come from the Big Ten and SEC. I think we've answered why we don't want the 2014 playoff pretty thoroughly. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Our last question comes from Jason in Decatur, Georgia, about simplified schemes. It seems that compared to previous eras, college teams run similar offenses. In the past, you had teams running pro style, spread, option, run and shoot, air raid, etc. I see the same thing in college basketball, where the NCAA tournament was more fun when you had Princeton's motion offense, Arkansas's 40 minutes of hell, etc. Is this just my perception, or has college football actually lost that variety outside of the service academies? I assume the high roster turnover of the portal puts a premium on running systems that are plug and play and can be learned quickly, which might be causing this.
I think we tend to think of these things through the prism of offense and offensive schemes because it's more digestible. It's the highlights we see. I know there's a lot of defensive variety that has come in. I mean, you look at Ohio State last year with Matt Patricia coming from the NFL and that Belichick system, and that was another one that had come from his son at Washington and now at North Carolina. You see like the specifics of like the adjuster role that Arvell Reese played so well. And it's kind of a hybrid, or the 3 safety look. Like you go back, I want to say it was like 10, 15 years ago, there was like, the Conference USA defense that a lot of people were running. And then I felt like it transitioned into the Big 12, and you would see it, whether it's Iowa State did some version of it. So I think it's there. I just think it's probably not as pronounced as maybe we would tend to think it is, like the air raid system or the triple option or all the freeze option and what Syracuse did and back in the day. Just a lot of different flavors of ice cream you would get more with offense, and I feel like it was a little easier to digest maybe from a concept than it is now on the defensive side of things.
Yeah, thinking this through is making me realize how good we had it for about 25 years, and that we saw several major changes in terms of the air raid was revolutionary. The kind of, the spread offense had existed, but, there was the Rich Rodriguez, Randy Walker, eventually Chip Kelly version where you're actually spreading to run the ball, right? And then you get the more shotgun offenses and the high speed offenses. Like there's a lot of fundamental changes. We are not really seeing that right now. We are seeing, I think a big trend right now is more motion, because of those defenses getting more advanced. You see a lot of teams doing more motion and shifting. After all that time going to high tempo, people are slowing it down a little bit. Here's my theory why we're not getting anything radically new that I just thought of 30 seconds ago. When you think of those offenses I just talked about, they all started with somebody being bold enough to say, let's just try this and see if it works. Like you've heard all the stories of drawing plays up in the dirt. And Rich Rod's offense started because he was down to his 3rd string quarterback. Like, F it, we'll just try this. And I feel like in today's college football, the stakes are so high, the money's so high, the job pressure is so high that people might be too risk averse to do that. Like, well, if we do that and we go out and embarrass ourselves, we might get fired. Like, I haven't asked anybody about that. I'm just kind of thinking of it on the spot. But like, yeah, to do something really crazy, like you got to be willing to put yourself out there.
Like Rich Rod, this is also what he created was kind of an accident, right? His quarterback, I think, went the wrong way at Glenville State. It wasn't like he was on a big stage when it happened. To me, one of the more innovative things anybody has done was Dave Clawson's staff at Wake Forest. To see the slow mesh as it played out and how it worked, because they couldn't block guys at Clemson and different things, was very, very creative and very smart. I think it fit for where they were at, right? And it was I don't know if I would call it counterintuitive. That's sure how it felt, and having a lot of conversations with Clawson, down the road of that. Like that was an interesting one. And I think we talked about this a little bit. Like at one point, Stanford dabbled in it, right? When David Shaw was there, and it's like, okay, here's a wrinkle. Cause it's like, when you see it, you're like, the ride and decide lasts for like 5 seconds. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, they're doing the Wake Forest stuff, and that is what's fun is when you see like the Dolphins under Mike McDaniel started doing some funky stuff with like, when it came to motion, it'd be like almost the motion guys going the wrong way in your mind at one point. And they got really creative with it. They didn't win much with it, but it was kind of fun to watch because it felt like they had a track team running it, and Tua would do some funky reads with it. And But again, I think that's another thing that makes college football great. And you do see it at different levels. Like a couple of years ago, I did a story on William and Mary doing some really creative stuff. And that OC is now at Wyoming. We'll see what Christian Taylor comes up with there in Laramie. But I think you'll still see elements of it. And I think because of the way that college football works and with the crowd and the Dan Casey's of the world, you'll see like a really creative play that'll start to go viral because somebody will tweet out the video of it.
And I do think like another thing that's happened is over the years, NFL started to adopt more college things and college started to adopt more NFL things, and they're not as different as they used to be. The last thing I'll just say is these things tend to go in cycles. So we went through a long period where the offense was, Nick Saban said at one point, I guess this was 2019 or 2020, defense doesn't win championships anymore. You got to have a high octane offense. And I think that pendulum has already swung back. So at some point in the next, let's say 5 years, somebody is going to come up with that big offensive epiphany that the defenses have trouble stopping. Who is going to get the gift card, Bruce?
I would vote for Vinny in Wisconsin. That would be my pick this one, because I just think it's a fun rabbit hole to go down. There's a lot of right answers to it of that guy who was the star. Like, as you were saying it, I'm like, I don't think Kellen Moore was leaving Boise to go someplace else, because it's not like I don't think he's commanding $6 million, because I think he fit that system really well.
Not in 2010.
No, not in 2010. I'm saying like if he came along now or whatever, it would have, maybe there's an obvious one. Like what would the bidding war have been on Reggie Bush versus USC to get him to leave? And he wasn't an FCS player, but neither was Kellen. So
I think you need we don't really see Heisman caliber guys transferring back and forth. Especially because like schools are also paying a lot of money to retain them. You would need like, who would be the old version of Sam Levitt, somebody like that. Anyway, I thought all three of these questions were really good. They all led to good discussions. My vote is for Jason and Decatur over the simplified schemes. That was a topic I hadn't really thought of recently. So that means we got to go to a tiebreaker to our producer, Matt.
Okay, guys, I am going to vote for simplified schemes.
I knew it.
Jason from Decatur, Georgia, because as someone who is not as in the weeds as you guys in college football, like the schemes is something I can really sink my teeth into and understand. And so I felt like I really dug that conversation.
Okay.
Sorry, Vinny, you were great too.
They were all great. Jason, please send your mailing address to theaudiblepod@gmail.com. Everybody else, send your questions to theaudiblepod@gmail.com. And one correction before we go. When we were talking about flag football in the Olympics, I asked those guys, why don't they just have women's flag football instead of men's? And it turns out they are having both at the 2028 Olympics in LA. Sorry about that. We'll see you next time.